The story begins on Naboo. In the plasma refinery, Darth Maul was slowly being pushed back by Obi-Wan's and Qui-Gon's relentless attacks. Maul kept retreating as the Jedi duo advanced toward the ray-shielded area leading to the reactor shaft. Qui-Gon was noticing something unusual about Obi-Wan. Usually, his apprentice was calm and calculating, but this time it was different. Obi-Wan aggressively advanced again and again. Qui-Gon realized it. It wasn't because of hatred or anger, but because of fear. This dark warrior in front of them, wielding red blades, truly did send shivers running down both of their spines. Suddenly, a ray shield blocked Qui-Gon's path. He stopped, but Obi-Wan suddenly stepped forward aggressively just as the area closed. Now, Maul and Kenobi were both trapped in a small space, not much more than a few meters wide. They both lifted their blades and charged at each other. Maul was aggressive and fast, and Obi-Wan quickly realized he made a grave mistake. This dark warrior moved almost perfectly in such a confined space. The two blades gave him an advantage. Obi-Wan was pushed into a corner, the red sabers relentlessly striking at him again and again. Qui-Gon tried guiding him, but Obi-Wan could barely hear him through the shields. Suddenly, Obi-Wan launched himself toward the floor, sliding under Maul's blade. He quickly stood back up and turned, but just as he lifted his saber again, he felt a blade slash right through his abdomen. Obi-Wan collapsed, and now Qui-Gon screamed, "No!" A second later, the shields opened again, and Qui-Gon, furiously yet elegantly, advanced. Maul was full of arrogance. Only the big guy remained. He kept retreating, and now, in the reactor shaft room, Maul had to redirect the fight. He advanced toward Qui-Gon and lifted his blade to strike his face, but suddenly a green blade sliced right through his hilt, and then through his face and torso. Maul collapsed, dying instantly. Qui-Gon, without hesitation, ran toward Obi-Wan, but it was too late. His apprentice was dead. He gave his life to defeat this dark warrior and to save Qui-Gon. Qui-Gon took a moment to remember Obi-Wan for who he was, then stood up straight and carried him from the plasma refinery as Naboo's security forces rushed past him to recover Maul's remains. Qui-Gon was informed that the war was won. Anakin destroyed the blockade ship. Finally, some good news. Soon, Qui-Gon stood by Anakin again, waiting for a transport ship from Coruscant to pick them up. 2 standard hours later, Qui-Gon was standing before a hollow projection of the entire Jedi Council, explaining exactly what happened. Everything he said sounded more far-fetched than the thing that came before it. Obi-Wan was dead, so was the Dark Warrior, and Anakin ended the battle? That was all very interesting and concerning. Nonetheless, Windu spoke, telling Qui-Gon that the recent events were very concerning. However, the council was still in agreement. Anakin would not be trained. But Qui-Gon wasn't prepared to stop protesting. Not now. Not ever. Very well. In that case, I'm leaving the Jedi Order. I'll train Anakin in the Jedi arts. Masters in the council looked shocked, except Windu, who just looked at Yoda, unwilling to deal with this. Nobody said anything after that. The transmission ended in awkward silence. The protest wasn't over. He was flying toward Coruscant anyway. He would need to confront them again. A couple of standard hours later, Qui-Gon was getting a much-deserved moment of silence on one of the Jedi Temple's many verandas. Anakin finally fell asleep after his exhausting little trip on Naboo. Suddenly, Yoda approached him, telling him he had done well. Qui-Gon managed to smile, although the loss of Obi-Wan still weighed heavily on him. "Agree with you training this boy, I do not, Qui-Gon." "Anakin will be trained, Master Yoda." Yoda almost couldn't believe how defiant Qui-Gon was. He really believed in this. Yoda said nothing more. He needed to meditate on this. Why did Qui-Gon trust him so much? Why this boy? His potential was enormous, but still, what made Qui-Gon believe in him so deeply? Nonetheless, they both just sat looking at the peaceful Coruscant skylanes as the sun began to rise again. Throughout the next couple of days, Qui-Gon and Anakin kept distant from the other Jedi, as Qui-Gon started explaining the basics of the Force to Anakin. And in all honesty, he loved spending time with Anakin. At least it distracted him from everything he lost recently, his master and his apprentice. Well, Dooku wasn't dead. He just wasn't a Jedi anymore. Although Qui-Gon doubted that Dooku wanted to see him again anytime soon, which wasn't a nice thought either. A new chapter just began for him. He trained Anakin passionately. Soon they started meditating together. Anakin was not good at it, but that was to be expected. He was 9 years old. He had no idea how any of this worked, and slowly but surely, Anakin got better at it. Day by day, Qui-Gon noticed small improvements. Day by day, Anakin's mind became clearer. His fear and passion were disappearing faster than Qui-Gon expected, and all of this was very promising. Days shifted into weeks and weeks into months as Qui-Gon slowly started introducing Anakin to a lightsaber, a weapon of a Jedi Knight. Qui-Gon knew he needed to keep all of this fun for Anakin. He didn't dare send him to an actual class to teach him the basics of wielding a lightsaber. All that time, Anakin and Qui-Gon mostly kept to themselves, sparring with wooden sticks in Qui-Gon's private quarters. Space was definitely a problem, but at least Qui-Gon was a master and had bigger, more luxurious quarters than Jedi Knights. Qui-Gon tried keeping it fun, but he knew this wasn't exactly what Anakin imagined his life would be like as a Jedi. Just spending all day, every day in a small, dark room. But Qui-Gon didn't really have a choice. He was just happy the Council didn't expel them from the Order. He never received permission to train Anakin. He'd better stay out of the other Masters' sight for now. Through these months of training Anakin, Qui-Gon also felt a growing darkness in the galaxy, something he and Dooku had always suspected. Jedi ignorance brought them to this. It was not a secret anymore. The Sith were on the rise. As Qui-Gon continued training Anakin, the boy became strong and disciplined. His mind was clear. He moved like a blur. His strikes were fast and decisive. Qui-Gon was truly proud of him. His training was going really well. It had been almost a year of Qui-Gon focusing solely on Anakin's relentless training when he was finally called into the Jedi Council chamber. It was quite awkward. Qui-Gon, as a Jedi Master, had other responsibilities besides training a Padawan that he had mostly ignored. But the Jedi Order let it slide because they didn't want to expel a fine Jedi like Qui-Gon. But now, he stood before the Council, without Anakin by his side, as Yoda spoke to him for the first time in almost a year. He explained that he respected Qui-Gon's determination, and the Council had come to the conclusion that Anakin can be trained. Qui-Gon was relieved upon hearing those words, but Yoda wasn't finished. Of course, there was something else, a reason they needed him. Classic Jedi Council. Yoda explained that they had a mission for him. He was to investigate Seyfo Dyas's passing. Yoda gave him some more details for his mission, and finally Qui-Gon once again left the Jedi Council chamber, relieved they were not expelled. From that moment on, Qui-Gon and Anakin began going on different missions in the Outer Rim. Qui-Gon immediately noticed a change in Anakin's behavior. He was already a great Padawan, but this new excitement in Anakin's life caused him to be even more focused and determined. He deeply enjoyed spending time with Qui-Gon as they traveled across the Outer Rim, helping people. Qui-Gon and Anakin were an iconic duo. However, they were still very disconnected from the Jedi Order. As they started going on more and more missions, their presence became a real rarity in the Jedi Temple. And soon, after an exhausting chase of a smuggler through the planet of Syria, Anakin and Qui-Gon found a large abandoned hut in one of the lush forests of the planet. Syria was a planet that went relatively untouched by pollution and advanced technology. This was due to the native Syrian species, who worked to preserve Syria's nature, even at the cost of both prosperity and technological advancement. As a result, Syria was a lush, green world covered in vegetation, save for some mountainous regions and several large oceans. Just the kind of place Qui-Gon loved the most. The force on the planet was so pure, it was incredibly relaxing. So Qui-Gon and Anakin were in agreement on this one. The Jedi Temple was great. However, it was located on a polluted planet, with a stressed population and a strict religious cult around them. They decided that this was a much better place to live in. They'd still pay visits to the Jedi Temple on Coruscant from time to time, but this was now their new home. It was completely abandoned and just big enough for both of them. The planet was located in the mid-rim, far enough from the galactic center that it was peaceful, but just close enough so they could quickly jump on a major hyperlane directly toward the capital. It was perfect. As Anakin turned 19 and the Clone Wars began, Qui-Gon and Anakin started appearing in the Jedi Temple more and more often again. Once grumpy Jedi Masters, unhappy with Anakin's training, were now glad to get any kind of help in their war effort. Slowly but surely, Qui-Gon and Anakin were becoming an iconic duo throughout the galaxy. Most of the time, they didn't directly lead clones in the war efforts. They preferred smaller Black Ops missions, but it all added up. Through the first months of the Clone Wars, Anakin and Qui-Gon took several missions trying to stop the rise of the Zagarian slave empire. They were active on battlefields such as Mon Cala, Kilura, and most notably Mandalore, where they were reunited with Senator Padme Amidala on diplomatic missions regarding Mandalore's involvement in the war and the rising threat of Death Watch. With Padme and Satine, they minimized corruption in the system. Qui-Gon was amused when Padme and Anakin started developing feelings for each other, just as Obi-Wan and Satine had on this exact planet all those years ago. Qui-Gon didn't try stopping them. He trusted Anakin. He was trained well. He knew he wouldn't allow his personal feelings to cloud his judgment. As the war continued, Qui-Gon and Anakin became nothing less than icons of the Republic's war effort. They weren't exactly keen on being seen as heroes, but they didn't try to stop it either. They knew they'd never be as recognizable as Grand Master Yoda or Master Windu. Those were the generals leading full-scale wars, while they were mostly just an iconic duo, trying to bring peace through diplomacy. The duo became a myth among crime lords, a tall Jedi wielding a green saber and his apprentice with a blue one, taking down corruption and crime across the galaxy. Anakin and Padme didn't see each other often throughout the Clone Wars. They mostly kept their relationship distant. They knew they'd at least need to wait until the end of the war, and they were both fine with it. Padme mostly stayed on Naboo, but as the war worsened, she permanently relocated to Coruscant. One night, when the war was reaching its peak, Anakin and Qui-Gon were sitting by the fire in the lush forest near their hut on Syria. They were discussing how the Jedi changed into this dogmatic cult, serving the Senate instead of their ideals, when a message from Grand Master Yoda himself arrived. The Jedi Council demanded their immediate presence on Coruscant. They looked at each other before. Without hesitation, they stood up and started walking toward their ship. 3 standard hours later, they were standing before the Jedi Council. Plo Koon first explained that he and his clone intelligence unit managed to find remnants of Sifo Dyas's ship and his lightsaber on one of the moons orbiting Obadiah. It was obvious that the Pike Syndicate was involved in covering up Sifo Dyas's death. They were to investigate this mystery and Pike's involvement in all of this. It was urgent, so Qui-Gon and Anakin were immediately dispatched to Obadiah as their ship came out of hyperspace and they landed on one of the countless landing pads on the foggy planet. They were greeted by 2 Pikes and escorted inside. In the throne room, Lam Pike was high on his precious spices as Qui-Gon and Anakin introduced themselves. Lam offered them a drink, which Qui-Gon politely declined. Without hesitation, Qui-Gon asked what the Pike's involvement was with Sifo Dyas's death. If they came out now, the penalties for their treason could be reduced. Lam was forced to show the Jedi the cell where Silman was being held hostage. Silman was former Chancellor Valorum's aide and friend before he was captured by the Pikes after surviving the crash of the same ship Sifo Dyas had been on. Qui-Gon and Anakin reluctantly entered the room, where Silman was hiding in the corner, starved and clearly suffering from a declining mental state. Before they could start asking him any real questions, he was suddenly lifted into the air and choked to death in seconds. Qui-Gon and Anakin immediately turned, igniting their sabers. Before them stood Count Dooku, leader of the droid army, and Qui-Gon's former master. After all these years, Qui-Gon finally saw his mentor again, but he didn't hesitate. Dooku was no longer a Jedi. He was a monster, and he would be dealt with as one. Without a word, Qui-Gon and Anakin lunged forward. Dooku met them with cold, calculated grace, retreating with surgical precision. Their lightsabers clashed again and again, each strike lighting the gloom with violent bursts of energy. The duel spilled outside into the roaring winds of Obadiah, and it was clear Anakin was dominating the fight. Something Dooku had not anticipated. Qui-Gon was older now. Dooku expected him to be a liability. Instead, Anakin protected his exhausted master with fluid precision and unrelenting power. The boy's skill was astounding. Qui-Gon had trained him well, perhaps too well. Dooku, breathing harder now, suddenly leapt backward, creating space between them. Qui-Gon stepped forward and shouted, "Just surrender, Dooku." Anakin pressed in, voice sharp. "What do you know about Sifo Dyas's death?" Dooku only smiled. Suddenly, Minister Lam and a group of Pike's soldiers stormed out from one of the entrances, blasters raised. Tension rippled through the air. "Minister Lam," Qui-Gon called out, "if you want to help us, now is the time. You have no business left with the Pikes, Tyrannus," Lam said coldly. Qui-Gon froze. Tyrannus. He looked at Dooku with new horror. He was the one, the man called Tyrannus. How didn't the Jedi Council know of this? How were they so blind? All this time, it was Dooku who orchestrated the creation of the clone army. Dooku's expression darkened. "The Sith control everything now, my old apprentice," he said. "They're where you least expect them to be, even in the Republic Senate." Sifo-Dyas understood. Then, without warning, Dooku leapt from the platform. A sleek ship rose to meet him, and he vanished into its hull as it soared away. Anakin stepped forward, ready to pursue, but Qui-Gon raised a hand. "Patience, Anakin." Soon, Qui-Gon stood on his ship, a projection of the entire council before him as he explained everything. He didn't hesitate to criticize the council for their blindness. It was clear they still didn't know anything about this war. When the transmission ended, Qui-Gon sat down with a horrible headache. But finally, Anakin brought the ship down on a lush field of Syria. That night, Qui-Gon couldn't sleep. He confirmed something he had always suspected anyway. The Sith were in the Senate. Their influence reached right to the top. Meanwhile, Anakin was outside, sitting by the campfire, meditating. Suddenly, he saw a vision. He saw the Senate, but it was dark, swallowed by shadows. On the Senate podium stood a dark figure, letting out a malicious laugh, roaring through the chamber. The vision ended, and Anakin opened his eyes. By his side stood Qui-Gon, a worried look etched into his face. "I felt a disturbance in the Force. Are you all right?" "Master, I saw something. A vision." "What kind of vision?" "I saw the Sith in the Senate." Qui-Gon's jaw tightened. "Did you see their face?" "No, Master. The Force is playing tricks on you. Don't let Dooku's words cloud your judgment." "But Master, I saw the Sith Lord. The Force spoke to me." Qui-Gon paused, silent for a moment, then he nodded slowly. "Very well, then we shall meditate together." Qui-Gon sat beside Anakin, and they both closed their eyes, focusing. Hours passed. The wind in the forest howled gently around them. Then, another vision came. This time, it was clearer. Anakin heard a twisted, malicious laugh. A dark figure stepped forward on the Senate podium. Under the hood, it was Chancellor Palpatine. Anakin's eyes flew open in terror. He turned to Qui-Gon and explained everything he saw. Qui-Gon listened in silence. Stunned, he stood still, thinking, then finally spoke. "We must trust in the Force. Chancellor Palpatine. He must be the Sith Lord we've been searching for." But he wasn't done. Qui-Gon made a decision. They would tell no one. Not yet. Anakin protested, demanding that Palpatine be captured and exposed. "No," Qui-Gon said calmly, almost with a smile. "The time will come. Trust in the Force. Be patient." They went to bed, but neither of them could sleep. The truth weighed too heavily on their minds. The following weeks were quieter than ever. Qui-Gon continued training Anakin, but something shifted. Anakin grew impatient. He didn't understand why they hadn't told the council, why they were waiting. Qui-Gon simply warned him again, "Patience. We will beat the Dark Lord at his own game." Only a few weeks after Anakin's vision, Qui-Gon received a transmission. Urgent. He and Anakin were ordered to immediately travel to Coruscant. The capital was under attack. Qui-Gon looked at Anakin with a knowing smirk. "This is our opportunity. Now, let's go." 2 standard hours later, their ship dropped directly into the battlefront over Coruscant. Blaster bolts zipped past the hull as chaos erupted around them. Another transmission from the Jedi Council came through. General Grievous captured the Supreme Chancellor. They were to rescue him. This was the moment they have been waiting for. Qui-Gon could feel it. Dooku was on that ship. Their ship, a diplomatic transport, had no business being in a battle zone like this. But thankfully, Anakin was an exceptional pilot. He angled them toward the invisible hand, weaving between vulture droids and explosions. The mission was dangerous, nearly suicidal, but they made it. The ship slammed hard into the hangar wall. It was immediately obvious they'd need to find a different transport out of there. Escape later, mission first. Inside the smoke-filled hangar, Qui-Gon explained the plan. The invisible hand had 2 main engines. Each would take one. If they destroyed them both, the ship would be pulled into Coruscant's gravity and crash, killing everyone on board, Sith included. Anakin understood. They split up. The halls were crawling with droids, but both Jedi cut through them like lightning. After a tense sprint through the war-torn corridors, they reached the engine rooms. They raised their hands, focusing. Sparks shot from the reactors as the machinery groaned and collapsed. Metal roared and screamed as explosions shook the ship. Both engines destroyed. The ship was going down. Now it was a race to escape. Luckily, the nearest escape pod bay was close, but the ship began to tilt and spin, disorienting everything. Fire raged through the corridors. Systems exploded. The air grew thin. Anakin and Qui-Gon finally reunited in the escape pod room. Anakin climbed into a pod and turned to his master. "Let's go!" Qui-Gon shook his head, a calm urgency in his voice. "I have to overload the launch systems. If I set them all off at once, the Sith can't escape. You know this." Anakin hesitated, conflicted. He knew the risk. He knew Qui-Gon might not make it, but there was no time. He launched the pod. Just as it blasted away, the chamber behind him exploded. The force of the blast cracked the pod's glass, but didn't shatter it. Fire engulfed the escape bay. Anakin could only watch in horror as the invisible hand began tearing apart behind him. His master still inside. All the escape pods detonated as Anakin launched his. Just in time, a massive explosion ripped through the pod bay, vaporizing every single remaining pod. They were gone, and so was Qui-Gon. Anakin fought the controls of his damaged pod, steering it back toward the wreckage of the invisible hand. Maybe, just maybe, he could still find his master. The spire of the ship tilted downward like a burning dagger, falling toward Coruscant with terrifying speed. Anakin watched in silent horror as the flagship crashed into the upper levels of the city world's towering skyline, piercing through skyscrapers and igniting in a massive, blinding explosion. The ship shattered into countless flaming pieces, the sky consumed in a storming blaze of white and red light. There was nothing left. Anakin's pod slammed into the lower levels of Coruscant, hard. Metal crunched. Sparks flew. He staggered out of the wreckage, battered, dazed, but alive. His master was gone. The Sith were gone. General Grievous, gone. Only a standard day later, Anakin stood before the Jedi Council, explaining everything he and Qui-Gon did, and why. Qui-Gon sacrificed himself to destroy the Sith Lords. He gave his life to save the Republic. This time, for the first time since Anakin had joined the Order, the Council stood with him. Yoda stepped forward, his voice calm but heavy. Qui-Gon Jinn was a Jedi and a hero, but we cannot share this truth. Not yet. The Senate would see it as treason, without more evidence. The Chancellor's death must remain a mystery for now. Anakin nodded. He understood. And then quietly, he left the chamber. Finally, after all this time, he could see Padme. She was here on Coruscant, in the Senate District, shaken by the recent events, but waiting for him. In the months that followed, the Republic won the war. The Separatists collapsed. The Senate, shaken by the revelation that Palpatine was the Sith Lord all along, began to recover, slowly, under new leadership. Anakin and Padme left it all behind. They moved to Naboo, where, at last, they were married in peace. And every night, by the quiet waters of the lake, Anakin sat beneath the stars and meditated, speaking softly to his master. Qui-Gon Jinn, still present in the Force,